Hey guys, it's Ornlu. So something a little bit different today. We just finished Hidden Cup 3, what does that say? 2 days ago? Yeah, 2 days ago. And the tournament was a huge success, and obviously props to T90 and Robo and Felix and everyone who's involved in that. And we obviously hit a huge number of milestones for the game growing as a whole. But I feel like this handy little spreadsheet here shows that there were some of the problems in terms of formatting and settings. And I'm not talking about the hidden cup thing. I'm talking about specifically maps and sieves and just sort of how the games played out. And I don't want to completely single out hidden cup because this has kind of been the trend recently. This was also somewhat the case at NAC3 earlier this year. But definitely since post DE launch, we've been straying a lot more towards home maps and hidden pick no repeat. And I think both of those settings have some inherent problems in them. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to have a little bit of a discussion on this and sort of flesh out my points, reasonings, or whatever as to why I think that collectively as a community we can make something that is more interesting than this, although still having competitive integrity. It's not just being boring, unfair blowouts or whatever. So if you look at this handy spreadsheet, I wish I had one like this for NAC3, but I don't, because I was casting it there. But you can see here that first, I guess we can start with maps. So in Hidden Cup 3, we had how many? 1, 2, 3, 4 hybrid maps out of 10. 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, yeah, that's 11 maps. So 4 out of those 11 maps were hybrid maps, which already seems like a lot to me, just in a general tournament pool, map pool thing going forward. Because then you get a disproportionate amount of these 7 Japanese mirrors. And I think that was almost every single game of High Tide and Cross. Yeah, I think if we have 7 Japanese mirrors, there are 8 games played on those 2 maps, and I'm pretty sure 7 of those games were Japanese mirrors. And when you have a lot of these hybrid maps, you just see these sieves more and more and more. And although individual games might be excellent on them, as a whole, if you're churning out a lot of games with these settings on these maps, it can get really kind of boring and not really showcasing all that Age of Empires has to offer as a game. Then you had Arabia, which was a set map, and it was always played first in, I think, every set. And I think that's something that I actually really like, and we've been doing for a while now. Arabia is just like the default map of competitive Age of Empires. And if you want to have unless you're like specifically having like, an arena tournament or something, like if you're having a general sort of tournament, having a game 1 on Arabia, just the classic, most basic way of determining player skill, like, getting into a series like that. I like that. But then Gold Rush and Hideout were played 8 times total. So other than Arabia, there were only 8 games that were on normal land maps. Only 2 games on Gold Rush, which is pretty crazy to me. And then 6 on Hideout, which is obviously the much more defensive Arabia-esque, well, land map, not Arabia map. And then you have, what is that? 12 games in total on what I call unique maps, so El Dorado, ravines, and slopes. And these are the sorts of maps where you have there's something wacky and wild and wadonkulous going on, and you have different starting resources, or especially food available to you. El Dorado, you have the Marlin, and that are right under your TC, Super Marlin, as it's called, and you have all the golden stone in the middle. Ravines, you have 2 forage bushes and a ton of hunt, but no boars. And on slopes, you have a bunch of hunt on one side and some and 2 ponds on each side of the map, each with a bunch of shorefish inside them. And I think that these sorts of maps, and this is just my opinion, need to be used very, very sparingly, because 1 game on slopes is really cool. 7 games on slopes makes me want to pull my hair out. And this was definitely kind of, at least personally, for me, getting to be the case as we got towards the end of casting Hidden Cup 3. And again, I don't mean to single out this tournament specifically. It's just what happened most recently is freshest in my mind, and I have the spreadsheet here. It's just going to be our framework for talking about it, but just know that this is not something that is unique to Hidden Cup. Well, I mean, the maps are, but, you guys get the idea. So I feel like what people want to watch when it comes to Age of Empires, and obviously there's all sorts of different tastes and people like different sorts of maps, but I feel like a tournament map pool should favor land maps. And this ain't it. This ain't it. But I guess I can talk about what I would want to do later, but I feel like this was a problem, especially also looking at Arabia aside, and even slopes aside a little bit, since it was a set map at the round of 4. So you can essentially, knock off, 3 games on it? You have Cup being played disproportionately a lot, same with Hideout and High Tide, and Slopes itself, as well as Bay, or Pants as it's called. Whereas maps like Cross Eldorado, Gold Rush, Islands, and Ravines were played very, very few times. And this was, I think, definitely the case at NAC3, where I think we had some maps that were played like way, 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 way more than others. And I think Islands was a victim here of people just seeing Islands over and over and over again. And I feel like that is the problem, which is sort of the other problem of maps, which is home maps. Now, pros are going to love home maps because they get to pick the maps that they feel most comfortable on and have strategies prepared for. But because pros generally like doing the same thing over and over and over again, because that's what you usually do to, hone your skills the best, and, you can sort of have that truest test of mechanical skills or whatever, you usually get stuff like this where you get the same maps played over and over again, which, if the map is like really, really good, might be fun to watch, but chances are they're going to get kind of boring, and you sort of don't even get to see a whole map pool fleshed out. So I think altering if not the concept of home maps completely, at least making it so that there are more set maps or randomized maps, and that this, it changes throughout a tournament so that we can see more of any given map pool, not just Hidden Cup 3, but in general. I think that would be something that would be good for the game and tournaments going forward. Now, moving on to civilizations in this sad chart here. I guess some of these statistics might be incorrect, but I'm pretty sure they should be all correct, as I was doing all of them live. And, I should note that this Excel graph thing only includes the main event of Hidden Cup 3, and I did not include the qualifiers or any show matches, because I wanted to make sure we were only taking data from the highest quality of players who are 100% tryharding, because there's a lot of money on the line in Hidden Cup. And I think this civilization distribution is a huge problem. You'll see in the lower right-hand corner, you have the 7 most picked civs made up 90% of all civ picks. That means we saw 7 out of 35 civs in 90% of the games. That can get real boring real fast. And we have just under half of the civilizations that were played, and again, it's an odd number, right? So just over half of the civilizations that did not get any playtime at all. And when you look at the civs that didn't get played, Goths were banned. So just, that's its whole different thing, and, a discussion for another video, but you don't really need to count them, so to say. most of the civs that weren't played were the new civs. You don't have any of the African kingdom civs that were played. No Berbers, Malians, Portuguese, or Ethiopians. You have no Raja civs played except Khmer. No Burmese, no Vietnamese. Malay weren't actually played, but they were banned once by, I think, Hera. So, I mean, that doesn't really matter. You just never actually saw them. And then Khmer, where did you guys go? Here. They were actually played a fair amount, and I think this is fine. This is good. But then the last Khan civs, you have Cumans. Played one game where they lost in the round of 16. And these are like the new civs. This is supposed to be like, highlighting DE and the new stuff that it brings to the game. Yeah, Cumans were played once. Bulgarians not played at all. Lithuanians not played at all. Tartars not played at all. Yeah, I think that's not great. I think people, especially pros, and I know this is true of myself, even in my pleb land level gameplay, really prefer to stick what they're comfortable with. And that's why we see Vikings, and Persians, and Mongols, and Mayans, and Japanese, all of these classic Age of Kings, Age of Conquerors civs that a lot of us have been playing for a long, long, long time. So even if other civs might be as strong or as competitive, people are going to, in a hidden pick no repeat scenario, you're going to want to go for with what you think gives you your best chance of success. And for most people, it's going to be what they're most comfortable with. That's the strongest, which is why you get tons of Chinese, which also had a 100% win rate, by the way. That's insane. And Aztecs, whenever they weren't banned, Mayans, that sort of thing. The one random outlier I just want to point out is that Huns weren't picked at all. When is the last time we've not seen Huns in a tournament where Huns were available to be picked? That is And yeah, I feel like because we have so many different maps, you sort of have the one or two civs that are most popular on that specific map. And then there's no repeat, right? So you just see those same civs over and over and over and over again. You have Persians and Mongols as the hybrid or water map civs. So you just saw those played on all those maps. And because those were necessarily with Arabia, where you saw Chinese and Mayans and sometimes Vikings or whatever. And then you of course had islands, which I believe was 3 Italian mirrors. I see 3 Italian mirrors and I see 3 games of islands. I would have to double check that, but I'm pretty sure all 3 games were Italian mirrors, because although I think that you have other civs that are totally viable, you would want to go with what you have you feel has the 1% edge, best chance of success, which right now the competitive community deems to be Italians. Although 4 or 5 months ago that was Japanese, despite 0 balance changes happening. It's just a meta shift or whatever. And I guess that brings me to, this is going to be controversial. I think that pros are going to go with the least creative option possible, the safest option possible, because it's them on the line, right? They need to do everything they can to win, but I think that kind of makes them not really think outside the box too much. It doesn't encourage thinking outside the box. There are plenty of brainy pros that can come up with really interesting strategies and sort of unique scenarios, different maps or civ matchups. It's why I do the civ matchup discussion thing on Reddit, is to sort of get people to think outside the box. Okay, if you're randomly thrown into Magyars versus Italians, how does that play out? I mean, you have the strong Magyar rush and cavalry, but then you have genbos. I feel there aren't enough situations where people are put into those scenarios and see what happens. And I think that when you say, "Oh, Civ wins," again, controversial opinion. I think that on a standard map, there aren't really that many civ wins. Like, say, on Arabia, I think you can probably pick. I'm just going to go down the list: Aztecs, Britons, Celts, Chinese, Cumans, Incas, Khmer, Mayans, Mongols, Persians, Slavs, Spanish, Vikings, Bulgarians, Franks, Goths, Huns, Lithuanians, Magyars, Malians, and yeah, that's probably it. But oh, maybe Saracens. Just throw them in there. Why not? I listed like what, half the civs in the game right there. I think that if you were playing random with any of those civs that I just mentioned, you're going to get what is more likely than not to be a pretty fair game. Like, unless you're in like the most extreme scenario where you're getting like Aztecs against Saracens, which is not a good matchup, by the way, for Saracens. It's not good at all. Like, unless you're getting something that is sort of that extreme, like the vast majority of those scenarios, I think you're getting a pretty even game of Age of Empires. And that's why when players were trying to climb the ladder back in Wololo Kingdoms days and were just playing Arabia, they were playing random civ most of the time because they know that, okay, the game is balanced enough that most of the time I'm getting a pretty good civ against a pretty good civ. And I feel like that sort of aspect of the game needs to be highlighted more because that sort of led to a lot of really, really different and interesting situations that really that tested the players both mechanically and strategically. Whereas watching a ton of Italian mirrors on water maps tests their mechanic ability, but much less so their strategic ability. And, you know, it's a real-time strategy game, not a real-time, you know, micro simulator like StarCraft Kappa. But I think that is something that going forward, I think we can do better. And I guess part of the problem is I don't like mirrors. 44% of the games in Hidden Cup 3 were mirrors. That number was, I think, around 25% at NAC3. Although I might be a little bit wrong on that. I think it was somewhere around 25%. That's even a little high for me. I think like 10 to 15, max 20% mirrors is fine. But I feel like those sorts of games tend to be the least interesting, or the grindiest in the late game, because it turns out most civs can't kill each other very well. There are exceptions to this. Hun Wars are good. I think Malian mirrors are also really good. And then there are maybe a few here and there. I think like Italians and Khmer also have pretty decent mirror matchups. But the vast majority of mirror matches in the game on the vast majority of maps, I don't really think create the most exciting games to watch as a viewer, which is, I think, the most important thing in a tournament, is that you create the most exciting games for people to watch while maintaining the competitive integrity of, you know, your event. So, I mean, I made this little solutions spreadsheet tab thing. These are just my ideas for a generic tournament. I take of it what you will. It's just my ideas. Feel free to disagree with them. But it's just sort of an example of what I think are the things we should look for going forward. So for map settings, I kind of like the idea, like I said, of set maps. Like mostly set maps, but like 1 or 2 home maps to give you that little bit of extra preparation. And then you have map pools that are diverse but weighted towards open land maps, and avoiding maps that have significant civ imbalance due to starting resources. Oh yeah, I didn't even talk about that. The thing that tilted me the most. Playing maps where you like literally have 1 or 2, you know, civs that are viable is really boring. And it's always, guys, it's the civs in question are always Chinese, Mongols, Indians, and then maybe Franks. And that's because what happens is starting food resources. They change everything. And you will just always see those civs specifically get broken on any map that deviates significantly in terms of your starting food resources. You have El Dorado, Chinese, Indians are both broken on them, because Chinese, you can negate the, starting with fewer resources, because you can just gather from, the fastest source of food income in the game right away under your town center with the Marlin. And Indians, again, shorefish bonus. Slopes, it's the shorefish bonus. I think every single game was an Indian mirror, except for 2 games, which were Incas versus Indians, because going YOLO all in towers is the only way apparently people thought they could stop Indians on that map. And then Ravines was a lot more diverse than I thought it would be, but it still ended up being a much more campy map than I think people thought initially. But point being, going forward, I think we should avoid maps where there are 1 to 2 civs that you can play. And that'll go over to like civs, which I'll talk about in a minute, but yeah, I think we should encourage there to be lots of different things available that are fair. And here's just an example map pool I have that I think is pretty good. Arabia, Golden Pit. A Golden Pit, mind you, that I would have there be fewer trees, so it's harder to wall. And then I would add in a more aggressive version of Arabia, like your Acropolis, or dare I say Serengeti, or something like that. It doesn't really matter which. And then a more defensive version of Arabia, so like, I don't know, cenotes, or maybe even graveyards, or, something like that. Again, the specifics doesn't really matter. It's more of the idea. And then I think it's good to have at least 1 or 2 like walled defensive maps. I think it's good to have Arena and Regicide Fortress in tournament map pools. I think those sorts of maps show a different aspect of the game that even your wall FC maps, like say, Golden Pit these days, where you just go like wall FC, like you still see different civs in those sorts of settings. And I think, the whole fighting over relics dynamic, and then the sort of late game strategic decisions, I do think that has a place in the game, although watching a lot of Arena can get really boring. So that's why I use it sparingly. Also, RF is completely, I would say, Chinese dominated right now, but hopefully some balance changes can just fix that problem, and we can go back to seeing a lot more civs viable on RF. And then Cross, and then going to like hybrid or water maps. Cross is my favorite hybrid map personally. I think that there's a lot of really cool things you can do there. I think there are more civs that you can play than just Japanese. But so that again would go into the civs discussion, but I think I really like Cross. Islands, I think having a pure water map has its place in tournaments. Not a bunch of them, just 1. And not necessarily 1 in every single series. That goes to like having a lot of set maps. So like, okay, in the round of 8, there is like a set islands game or something like that. This isn't specific. I'm just generalizing here. And then like maybe 1 crazy or unique map like Coast to Mountain or Seize the Hump, or a map that you would only see for the 1 tournament and then never use again, because then it would be figured out and then it would likely be boring. So something like that. Like Coast to Mountain was really cool to watch for like the first, 4 or 5 times, and then it got figured out and then it became a lot more boring. So something new and fresh, I think having that little splash in there is a good thing. And then of course civs, I do think drafts are the way to go. I don't think it's the only way you can do things, nor should it be the only way you do things, but as a default, I think drafts should be the default over hidden pick no repeat, so long as you can mitigate the downsides of drafts. Drafts, when it comes to live drafts, pros are really slow, so do the drafts ahead of time. Yes, that requires more logistical, work, but with the amount that this game is growing, I think we can manage it. That way you don't have slowdowns in broadcasts, which I think is a big, big problem with drafts. And 2, you need to have maps that are balanced enough so that civ wins are really, really, really rare. And if, some pro tells you that Italians are a civ win over Japanese on islands, you should look at them very skeptically. I really don't think that you can say that, Italians versus Japanese on islands is a civ win. Either way, I think that's pretty damn even. If you do have maps that are sort of skirt around the edges, like utilize civ bans when necessary, you can use that in the draft itself, or say like on the current balance, Regicide Fortress, I would just ban Chinese. We did that at NAC3 with Valley, where we banned Mongols, and that made the map a lot more interesting. Theoretically, players just ended up playing it like Arabia, but theoretically it's a good idea. And then this is something I don't have a good answer to. Uh, have some sort of settings, do something in a way that encourages civ diversity that, obviously maintains the competitive integrity of the event. I want to see, Bulgarians versus Teutons, the battle of the heavy armor infantry civs. That would be cool. But you'll just never get experts to pick Bulgarians, because why would you want to do that when you can just go Mongols? And, you can't blame pros for wanting to do that. Like, you want to do what you think has the best odds of you winning, like mathematically, and then what you're most comfortable with on top of that. Who knows? Maybe the things that would give you the best odds of winning aren't something that is like Mongols or Persians or whatever. Maybe it's something that's different, but no one ever really wants to try extensively. So having at least settings where you can sort of encourage that, I think would be really interesting going forward. But again, how you do that without ruining the competitive integrity of the tournament, I'm not too sure, but I believe we can do something. So that's really I guess what I wanted to get in this rambling, incoherent rant. Again, I think that where we're going is really incredible in Age of Empires, and I don't want me addressing some problems I have in tournament settings to like me hating on those events or all the show matches that have come in between them that have utilized similar settings, because I really enjoyed being part of NAC3 and I enjoyed casting Hidden Cup. And I think that the success of those tournaments is just incredible for the game, and I'm really excited to see where we're going in the future. But I think that we can make the tournaments themselves more interesting as far as the games go. I think we can do that, because I don't want to be in a situation where it's like I would be casting a game and I literally would see the map in Civs and I'm like, I do not want to cast this game because I know exactly how it's going to play out. And no one wants to do that, and people don't want to watch that. So that's just all my opinion. Obviously, people have different opinions, and people, you can all go in the comments, go wild, tell me what you think we can do. Do you like the format of hidden pick, no repeat, lots of home maps? If that's really what the community likes as a whole, I think, who am I to judge? I haven't organized any tournament yet. I'd like to in the future, but no guarantees. But I'd like to do that. But regardless, hope you guys at least consider what you're talking about and the sort of different ways you can approach a competitive Age of Empires tournament that are a little bit more unique or interesting as far as the actual settings go, how the game is played, I guess you could say. At least that's my thought. But again, thank you all for listening to my rambling. I guess leave a like if you enjoyed, sub. Yeah, that's the YouTube one, sub. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.